Hey 302, I'm Jackie Ferris. Today we are traveling with the Bringhursts. You wouldn't take your car with you today on a trip to Europe, but back in the day it was an actual thing. And we're going to talk about it coming up. The 302 is headed your way. Hey 302, traveling with the Bringhursts. It's a new exhibit that you can come see now at Rockwood Mansion. I'm joined now by Loretta Spiegel, who is going to tell us all about the exhibit. But first, Loretta, thank you for joining us. Let's go over the members of the Bringhurst family. I know that they came from, the family had a pharmacy and they're really well known in Wilmington, but we're talking about four of their kids. So it's Elizabeth,
Bessie, Mary, Edith, and Edward.
So this exhibit, it's amazing. When you come in, you see passports of some of the children, and it's all about their travels all over the world, right? So tell me a little bit about the family and their love for travel.
Well, it actually started with Bessie. In 1900, Bessie, one of her neighbors and very good friends, introduces her to some friends of his. The man who introduces her is Sir George White. George White is the British governor of Gibraltar, and so he is very influential. And so he has friends in Germany. They're Count and Countess Urbach, and also Count and Countess Wittenstein, and they're actually from two different parts of Germany. The Wittensteins are from the Bavaria area, and the Urbachs are from the Frankfurt area. These are old, established German families that go back centuries. And so Bessie's very impressed by this. And so she does meet these the Count and Countess, and they become friendly. But in the meantime, she does travel to other places. She has friends that are in France, and so she goes to the Paris Exposition in 1900, where they like to go to the Riviera. They'll go to Paris, and they have the croissant and pastries, and they'll go into cafes. They do a stroll on the promenades. So it's where they can be seen and they can see. And so people will see them. Bessie really, by this time, has a very good impression of herself because now she's the lady of the manor. And so so this is where the travel begins in 1900. So between 1904 and 1905, her brother Edward V and her sister Mary begin to join them in their travels. They especially like Germany, and so they do stay at the Schloss, or the castle, where Urbach lives. And she describes it to her mother as, of course, it's centuries old. It's the newer castle is 16th century, and so she describes it to her mother in a letter home. And by the way, they write, there's over 2,500 letters, travel letters that we have of the Bringhursts.
Are they part of the exhibit?
They are not, because we did put a couple of letters in. They are difficult to read, and we do have some that were transcribed. We don't have them here at the house anymore. They are now at the University of Delaware. We have photographs. There are over 6,000 travel photographs. The family loved taking photographs, both Bessie and her brother Edward. So they actually had a dark room put in so they could develop their own photographs. And Edward was reprimanded by his father in one of the trips because he was spending too much money on photography. So not only do they like to travel, but they love to take pictures of everything that they saw.
So, and they also would take a lot of things with them, right?
They did. They traveled with their car and, of course, their chauffeur. They had a Pierce Arrow, and that was their vehicle that they traveled in. And so they would travel with a maid, and of course lots of trunks. We do have some trunks on display, and there are suitcases that you can see, some of them that they actually did use, and some of them that we have that were accessioning and given to us. So throughout the house you will see bits of clothing. We do have a lot of their clothing. Unfortunately, they're over 100 years old and they're not in very good condition. But on some of the rooms, we do have original pieces of clothing from the family. The other rooms have reproduction clothing in there. And our guides, on occasion, it depends on the guide, they will dress up in period dress to make the tour more realistic.
Yeah, the tour is about an hour, right?
The tour is about an hour, and people usually ask a lot of questions. So what we've done is we've put boards in each of the rooms with some information on them. So if the guide wanted to read them, or if they wanted to go back and read some of the things that happened on some of their trips to Europe, especially in Germany, because they spent so much time in Germany. They were not all trips that were vacation trips or trips to meet family and friends. Edward developed tuberculosis, and so they did spend some time in England before he was diagnosed, so back and forth to different doctors. And then, of course, from there he went to Wiesbaden in Switzerland and different places for treatment.
So we're going to talk a little bit more about the various places that the Bringhurst family went when we return.
I'm Stephanie Lampkin, and we're making history on the 302.
Welcome back. We're talking about traveling with the Bringhurst. We're at Rockwood Mansion. I'm joined by Loretta Spiegel, who is the expert on this exhibit. Now, we were talking an overview of all the places they had been, but let's break it down to Ireland. Ireland was the beginning, and then there was England.
Yes.
Let's talk a little bit about that.
Well, when Bessie moved to Ireland, she had, I guess, decided that she was going to make influential friends. So Sir George White, who, as I mentioned earlier, was the British governor of Gibraltar, he actually sponsored her for her presentation. She was presented to the King and Queen of England in 1903. So she was presented to Edward VII and his wife Alexandra.
Now you guys have a photo of that day.
We have a photo. We have a lot of photos, and we even have photos of. I don't have them on display because we didn't have a lot of room to put them. But we have photos of her gown. It was a very big deal, and she was concerned about her jewelry, that she wouldn't have, jewelry that would be enough to impress, and so and she didn't have a crown. So what she did was she had Prince of Wales feathers, and of course that's the 3 feathers. And what we've done in the dining room, because we have England in there, in the centerpiece we have 3 feathers representing the Prince of Wales feathers, and that's what she has on her head. And of course she did have some beautiful jewelry as well. Bessie was very much into how she looked when she was riding in the carriage going to Dublin to be presented. She was telling her mother how everybody was looking at her because her gown was so beautiful and that she was so beautiful, and she felt that her gown equaled, if it was not better than, the Queen.
Wow. She really did have a high opinion of herself.
She did. She did. She had a very high opinion of herself. She was the lady of the manor. And then, of course, she did entertain a lot of, she entertained Mrs. DuPont, Mrs. Alfred DuPont, in her castle in 1904.
Okay.
Mrs. DuPont stayed with her for about 2 months. Unfortunately, she had to leave because there was a family emergency. She went back home and then returned. So evidently, they had a very good friendship. Mrs. DuPont brought her friend Mary Cooper with her, and she actually brought one of her sons, her youngest son. So she entertained a lot of the local Delawareans in her castle as well.
So what about Edward? He was also presented to the
He was
king
presented in 1911, and so he was actually presented at St. James Court in England, and he was presented to George V and Queen Mary. And so we have photos of Edward and of Bessie. They're in the dining room. You can see them in their regal attire. We actually have them. We have the suit and the sword, and we have his shoes with the fancy buckles on them. But we didn't put them out because they are in storage, and we're just concerned, about because they're so old. And Bessie's gown, we had that out 5 or 6 years ago, and it's all silk, so it's really disintegrating. So we're not able to put them out, but you can see the photos and kind of have an idea of how regal she really was.
I'm kind of curious, knowing that Bessie was presented and it was years later that Edward was presented, was it kind of like a rivalry? Well, you were presented, so now I have to be presented.
Well, being presented is really a segue into European society or into society. And so to be more acceptable, maybe that was one of the reasons why he wanted to, but he traveled with his sister, so they were accepted everywhere. In fact, some of the letters of the Count Erbach, say how much they missed him when he didn't come with Bessie to visit with them. So they always said how intelligent he was, and always had kind manners and very nice things to say about Edward. And in turn, she did the same thing. She had a very good opinion of the Germans. She said that they were kind and charming, and she loved their country, and particularly Mrs. Erbach. Her name was Maria, and so Bessie describes her as being very elegant, with beautiful white hair, she describes her clothing, and then she also says that she had superb jewelry.
Oh yeah,
So,
she always has her eye on that
the
jewelry.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah.
But we're going to talk a little bit more about Germany and some of the other things in relation to the exhibit, Traveling with the Bringhursts, when we return.
Hey, Joe Van Horn, Chelsea Tavern. You're watching the 302.
Welcome back. We're at Rockwood Mansion talking about the exhibit Traveling with the Bringhursts. And Loretta, we were talking previously about Germany and Bessie's love for the country. Talk to me a little bit about, that romance.
Well, she did love Germany, and she thought it was a beautiful country. She loved the people. As I mentioned, she thought they were very kind and charming. She also she wrote home to her mother saying that, humorously, how the cultural differences between the two countries were. And one instance is that she was out one day with a group of people, mostly royalty, And she'd been out all day, and they went to beautiful parks, and they went to museums, and they went to restaurants and had lunch. And by the end of the day, she was very tired. And so she tried to explain to them that she wanted to leave because she was tired. Of course, there was a language barrier. And so she said that, she wanted to leave. And they said, why? Are you ill? Did someone say something? Is it the sun? And so she had asked a friend to interpret that, that she was tired. And finally, they understood that she had a headache and had to leave, and that was her escape. So there were funny little stories about how, she was with the royals, and sometimes that she just wanted to be by herself. And so she liked to describe their homes, like the Castle Schloss Urbach. She describes that as it was so large with so many rooms, and that the Count loved to talk about the architecture and the furniture, and so there were so many interesting things that she really admired about the different Germans that she associated herself with. And then, of course, when she went to the Wittensteins, she describes their castle as very old, and it's the quaintest that she ever saw, with so many rooms, but large pillars in the entrance and stone floors. So she describes everything in her letters home to her mother and father. And she loved, going out to the parties with them and meeting other friends. They traveled to Berlin. They traveled to Wiesbaden. So they were constantly on the move, always, visiting and making new friends.
But there was a point in which, she no longer maintain the relationship. Talk to me about that.
Unfortunately, she was friends with the Germans up until about 1912. Actually, maybe a little bit even after that. But she and her family traveled a lot on the Lusitania. In fact, when her father came to visit her, he traveled on the Lusitania from New York. And so in 1915, when the Germans sunk the Lusitania, of course, Bessie was very saddened and angry because of what happened, and that was the end of, I guess, their beautiful relationship.
Mm-hmm. Did she write about this?
She did. There are letters saying that how unfortunate it was, and how disappointed and angry she was at what happened. Of course, we all know that the Lusitania had sunk in 1915.
Yeah. And you have, as part of the exhibit, you have a whole section.
I do. There's a whole section on that. There's also a section on their passports. It describes when they took the trips. It tells you what their height was. The girls were 5'6". Bessie and her sister were both 5'6". The men were 5'10". Mr. Bringhurst and his son Edward. So it tells you they have brown hair, and there are some photographs on some of the passports, so you can see those. That's actually in an area where it's self-guided, so you can just go on your own and read some of the information on the Lusitania, and you can see the copies of the passports.
Now, I know there's so much to the exhibit. Was there one thing when you were putting it together that surprised you, that you were like, wow?
There were actually a couple of things. The fact that that she wrote so much about describing the friendships and describing their homes, describing how they looked. I was really surprised that she went into all that. You would think that she would be talking more about the people that she met. And she did. She talked a lot about the people that she met. A lot of times she talked about how in Paris they were on the promenade, and that they had to have their parasols because the sun, because of the sun, and they would promenade I'm sorry, I forget where they promenade. They did promenade, but they had to have their parasols because of the sun. But they had to do the promenade because you had to be seen, and so that's why they would walk along and talk and use their parasols. They also talked about how difficult it was traveling with the clothing, because a lot of times they said it was more difficult on their hats. Their hats were always wearing out for whatever the reasons, but that was one of the things they complained about. And there was a final trip in 1931. Bessie did not make it. Bessie died in 1932, but her brother, Mary, and her brother took a final trip for 3 months. They took a cruise on the RMS Harmac, and they went to 10 different countries. I don't have that out, but I am going to put that out. They went to the Caribbean, they went to Jerusalem, Greece, Egypt. There's so much on Egypt. They were back and forth on Egypt quite a bit. And so this trip lasted for 3 months. Most of it was on the ship, but some of it they would get off the ship and go by train and then get back on the ship again. And so they did go to Gibraltar, they went to Cairo, and then at the end of the trip, the end of March, when the trip ended, they had to go to England to rest up for 2 weeks.
Amazing. So if somebody wants to see the exhibit, how long is it running?
It started in March and it goes until the middle of October. Our tours are on the hour. Okay. So we're here from Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, from 10 to 3, and then the last tour is at 3, and then on Sunday we're here from 12 to 4, and they're on the hour.
All right. Loretta, thank you so much for joining us.
You're welcome. Yeah.
We'll be right back. For more information on traveling with the Bringhursts or any of the exhibits here at Rockwood Mansion, be sure to check them out on Facebook. That'll do it for this episode of the 302. We leave you now with a breathtaking view of the supermoon at Newcastle Wharf. Until next time, I'm Jackie Ferris. We'll see you on the 302.